My parents spent over $300,000 backing my sister's business without telling me. When she vanished with her boyfriend and all their money, they came to my door begging for help. But by then I had already learned that being the quiet daughter meant you were only remembered when everything else had failed. My name is Lauren, and this is the story of how I chose peace over family loyalty and never looked back. I used to think we were the kind of family people wrote holiday cards about. We weren't rich by any means, but we had what mattered. A warm two-story house with faded green shutters on the east side of Rochester, Minnesota. A maple tree in the front yard that turned brilliant red every October. Family dinners at 6, laughter echoing from the kitchen, and the smell of Mom's pot roast wafting through every corner of the house. Back then, it was just me, my little sister, Sierra, Mom, Dad, and Grandma Dolores, who lived a few blocks away. Dad worked at the local credit union as a loan officer, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school near our neighborhood. Life felt predictable in the best way. Weekends meant pancake breakfasts, church on Sundays, and long walks through Quarry Hill Nature Center. There was a rhythm to it, a simplicity I didn't realize was fragile. Sierra and I were close when we were young. I was only 2 years older, so we shared almost everything: our toys, our room, even our secrets, whispered under the covers after lights out. She had this wild imagination, always inventing stories and games. We used to set up entire towns made out of shoeboxes and name every citizen. I remember laughing until our stomachs hurt, collapsing onto the carpet with tears in our eyes. Grandma Dolores was the only person who treated us completely equally. Every Friday after school, she'd pick us up in her old blue Ford and take us to Apple Creek Farm for cider donuts. Fall was her favorite season. She said it was nature's way of reminding us that change could be beautiful. She never said much, but when she spoke, I listened. She had that quiet presence, the kind that made you feel safe just by standing next to her. I still remember the exact shade of her flannel jackets, the way she always carried peppermints in her purse, and how her kitchen always smelled like cinnamon. She taught us how to peel apples with a paring knife without breaking the skin. Sierra was never good at it, but Grandma never minded. She'd just smile and say, "That's all right, honey, try again." At night after dinner, the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Sierra, and I, would gather in the living room. Dad in his recliner with the sports section, Mom knitting or grading papers, Sierra curled up with a comic book, and me sprawled on the floor with a flashlight and a Nancy Drew mystery. It wasn't perfect, of course. Sometimes Sierra would steal the last cookie or whine until I let her have the television remote. But it didn't matter. It was family, and I thought that meant something permanent. One summer evening, I remember laying on the grass with Sierra counting stars. We had this game where we'd name constellations after people we knew. "There's Dad," I'd say, pointing at Orion. "Because he's always trying to protect everyone." Sierra laughed. "And that one's you," she pointed. "The quiet one in the corner, watching everything but saying nothing." We both giggled. It was a joke then. Sometimes I think about that night and wonder when the shift began. When did the warmth start to fade? At what point did my parents stop looking at me with the same softness they reserved for Sierra? Back then, I never questioned whether I belonged. I never noticed if my victories were quieter in their eyes, or if their pride leaned more heavily toward her. Back then, we were sisters. Just that. Not rivals, not comparisons, not placeholders for expectations. I remember helping Mom decorate the Christmas tree one year. She handed Sierra the angel for the top, even though I was older and had always done it. Sierra looked at me, hesitated, then shrugged and climbed the step stool. I smiled, pretending it didn't sting. I told myself it was fine, that maybe she just wanted to feel special. I didn't know it was the beginning of a pattern. Dad used to say we were his girls. He'd scoop us both up on the couch, one on each side, and tickle us until we begged for mercy. I can still hear the sound of his laugh echoing off the walls. I used to think that laugh was meant for both of us equally. I used to think a lot of things. Back then, I didn't see the imbalance. I only saw the memories, the good ones. Sunday afternoons, baking cookies, long car rides, singing off-key birthday parties in the backyard with too much frosting and not enough forks. They're real. They happened. And I hold on to them even now because they remind me that there was a time when we were just a family. No sides. No favorites. And maybe that's why it hurt so much when everything started to change. Because you can only lose something when it once felt like it belonged to you. It started with the small things. Subtle shifts in the way my parents spoke to us, the way their eyes lingered a little longer on Sierra when she said something clever, the way their voices lifted with genuine enthusiasm when she walked into a room. I didn't notice it right away. It was like the slow dimming of a light bulb. You don't realize how much darker the room's gotten until you reach for the switch and find it doesn't work. By the time I was in 6th grade, Sierra had found her spotlight. She was loud in the way that people found endearing, funny in the way that adults called precocious. She had a gift for telling stories and mimicking voices, and she used it to charm anyone who would listen. At school, teachers gushed about her creativity. At home, Mom and Dad hung her drawings on the fridge like little trophies. I still remember one afternoon after school. I had just received a perfect score on an essay about the civil rights movement. It had taken me days to research and write. I handed it to Mom while she was grading papers at the kitchen table. She glanced at the top, saw the red 100 circled at the top corner, smiled briefly, and said, "Good job, honey." Then she went right back to her own stack. That same evening, Sierra came barreling into the kitchen with a picture she'd drawn in art class. It was a cat wearing sunglasses. Not particularly detailed, not even in proportion, but she held it up like it was the Mona Lisa. Mom gasped, "That is adorable. Look at that, Tom. Isn't she just so talented?" Dad got up from the recliner to come see. He ruffled her hair, laughing. "That cat's got more style than me." I sat at the table sipping my milk, pretending not to hear the rush of warmth in their voices. It wasn't just about the cat drawing. It was the way they lit up when Sierra was proud of something. They mirrored her joy, fed it, amplified it. When I achieved something, it was met with quiet approval, a nod, a brief comment. Nothing wrong with that, but it started to feel like I was getting polite applause while Sierra got standing ovations. At school, it was the same. I was the girl who always turned in her homework on time, who followed rules and raised her hand. Sierra, 2 grades behind me, was already a favorite in every classroom she entered. She cracked jokes that made teachers laugh. She got away with whispering during tests or doodling in her notebook when she should have been listening. When she forgot her lunch, the school secretary called Mom and she came running. When I forgot mine once, I was told to borrow from a friend and be more responsible next time. Even Grandma Dolores, though never unkind to me, began to slip into the rhythm of Sierra's charm. Sierra would braid Grandma's thinning white hair, tell her stories in funny accents, and do dramatic reenactments of school plays. Grandma chuckled and clapped along, and I watched from the couch, quietly turning pages of whatever book I was buried in. Sometimes she'd pat my knee and say, "You're so thoughtful, Lauren." But I began to wonder if thoughtful meant invisible. The more Sierra leaned into her role as the family's spark of joy, the more I pulled away. Not out of bitterness, at least not yet, but out of confusion. I didn't understand how things had changed so quickly. Why my quiet strength seemed to matter less. Why being consistent and kind and diligent didn't earn the same praise as being bubbly and bold. One evening we were sitting around the dinner table. Dad had made spaghetti and overcooked the noodles, which he did often. Sierra laughed and made a silly face, joking. "These are noodles or worms, Dad." Everyone cracked up. Mom playfully flicked water at her from her glass, and Dad pretended to be wounded. Sierra was in the center, spinning everyone like planets around her son. I had tried to join in once, months before, making a dry joke about one of Dad's awful puns. He told me I should try being less serious. I hadn't tried again since. The distance grew slowly, but it was real. I stopped bringing home tests to show them. I stopped waiting for them to notice when I stayed up late finishing a science project or helped clean up the kitchen without being asked. Sometimes I would sit in the living room while Sierra told stories, watching how my parents' faces followed her like sunflowers turning toward the light. I wondered if they remembered what my voice sounded like when I was excited. The hardest part was pretending not to notice. Pretending it didn't sting when they forgot to ask how my debate meet went but drove an hour to watch Sierra's middle school talent show. Pretending it didn't matter when they posted photos of her art fair ribbon on Facebook but didn't mention my acceptance into the advanced reading program. pretending that being overlooked wasn't slowly teaching me how to disappear. I didn't hate Sierra. At least not then. I envied her, sure. I resented how easily things came to her, how effortlessly she pulled people in. But she wasn't malicious. She didn't flaunt it or rub it in. If anything, she was just doing what came naturally. It wasn't her fault she was their favorite. It wasn't mine that I wasn't. One night after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the stairs and listened to Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the walls in that house were thin. Mom said something about Sierra having potential. Dad agreed, saying she was going to be someone special. Then there was a pause, and Mom added Lauren steady. She'll be fine. Steady. Fine. It was meant as a compliment maybe. But it landed like a verdict. Like my story had already been written and filed away while Sierra's was still unfolding with wonder and open possibility. I stayed on the stairs for a long time after that, staring at the dark hallway, my knees pulled to my chest. That was the first time I realized that love wasn't always equal even when people said it was. By the time I started college at the University of Minnesota, I had gotten used to being steady. Steady grades, steady part-time job, steady expectations. I majored in accounting because it made sense. Numbers didn't play favorites. They didn't smile wider for someone else. I liked the predictability of it, the logic. While my classmates changed majors or spiraled over midterms, I balanced work shifts at a campus coffee shop and mapped out my semesters on color-coded spreadsheets. Sierra, on the other hand, moved to California for college, attending a private school in Los Angeles to study communications and digital media. It was a vague major, but Mom and Dad seemed enchanted by the possibilities. Creative branding, social influence, storytelling, Sierra said on the phone one night. I'm gonna build something big. You'll see. Dad laughed like she had already done it. Whatever you need, kiddo, we're proud of you. Whatever you need turned out to be a lot. Sierra started asking for money regularly. First it was dorm supplies, then a better laptop, then camera equipment for a YouTube channel she was launching. Mom called it entrepreneurial spirit. When I asked how they were managing to afford all of it, especially on a teacher's salary and a mid-level bank job, Mom said they'd figure it out. For Sierra, they always did. Meanwhile, I was living in a shared apartment with 2 other girls, pulling double shifts at the cafe during finals week to make rent. I learned how to stretch a $5 meal into 3 days. I watched YouTube videos on how to sew up the worn-out soles of my shoes. I never asked for help. I knew what the answer would be. During winter break, my sophomore year, I came home for 2 weeks. The house was decorated, warm and familiar, but something about it felt like it belonged to a different version of me. One evening, Sierra FaceTimed from LA. She gave Dad a virtual tour of her new apartment, talked about a collaboration deal she was working on with a clothing brand, then panned her phone to show a guy sitting on her couch. "This is Damien," she said, grinning. Damien Torres looked like he had walked out of a tech startup commercial. He had that polished kind of charm, all curated stubble and designer sneakers. He waved at the camera. "Heard a lot about you guys." After they hung up, Dad leaned back in his chair, nodding. "Seems like a smart young man. Knows what he wants." Mom was beaming. Finally, Sierra found someone who understands her ambition. I poked at my casserole with a fork. "So what does he do?" Sierra said. "He advises startups." Dad answered. "Something with e-commerce or branding. He's got experience." That word again. Experience. It was always tossed around like a golden ticket. No one asked for credentials or proof. They just liked the way it sounded coming out of Sierra's mouth. Back at school, I couldn't stop thinking about the ease in Sierra's life. How she moved through the world with soft landings, how people just believed in her. I wasn't jealous in the way I used to be. It had evolved into something quieter, heavier, a knowing. I had learned not to expect applause, but I hadn't expected to be so fully erased from the narrative. That spring, while I was applying for internships, Sierra announced she was launching her own brand. She posted about it everywhere. A skincare line, handmade and eco-friendly, backed by personal investors, which I assumed meant Mom and Dad. On a call, I asked Mom directly. "It's not a lot," she said, like I was being intrusive. "We're just helping her get started. Every young person needs a chance." I wanted to say I had never been given a chance, only expectations, but I didn't. I swallowed it just like always. Damien started appearing more often in family conversations. He had connections, ideas, knew the industry. Dad told me over the phone, he reminds me of myself at that age, driven, focused. I said nothing. Sierra's social media presence was growing. Professional photos, brand, sponsorships, video blogs of her day. She had started calling herself a founder. Her website used phrases like market disruption and direct-to-consumer innovation. I watched from my laptop in my off-campus apartment eating instant noodles between shifts. I didn't resent her success. What gnawed at me was the way it all seemed to exist in a vacuum untouched by accountability. No one asked if it was sustainable. No one questioned the money. I had to itemize every expense to afford my textbooks, and she got brand redesigns and influencer retreats. The summer before my senior year, I came home again. The house felt quieter. Mom looked tired. Dad spent more time on the porch with his phone than talking to us. Sierra didn't come back at all. She was in Bali filming content for her latest campaign. One night while I was washing dishes, Dad sat at the table flipping through bills. I saw him rub his temples. Everything okay? He looked up and smiled too fast. Yeah, just end-of-month stuff. I dried my hands and walked away knowing he wouldn't say more. Knowing that even if something was wrong, they wouldn't involve me. I wasn't part of that circle. I never had been. Later that week, I found an old notebook of mine in my childhood bedroom. The pages were filled with goals, scribbles of dreams I had once dared to write down. Travel. A job I love. A life that feels like mine. I closed it slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared out the window at the same maple tree that used to drop its leaves like golden rain. For a long time, I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I stayed good and steady, someone would notice. But all I had become was dependable. And dependable people get left behind when things start to look shiny elsewhere. The worst part was I had started getting used to it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Jenna called. I was on my lunch break sitting on the back steps of the office building where I had just started my internship with a small tax firm in St. Paul. The sun was out, but my skin felt cold the second I heard her voice. Hey, I need to tell you something, but you didn't hear it from me. I could hear papers shuffling and the low hum of her office behind her. Jenna worked as a financial operations assistant at Northern Prairie Credit Union, where my dad also held most of his personal accounts. We weren't particularly close, but we got along well enough. Still, she had never called me during work hours before. Your parents have been making some big transfers lately. Like really big. And frequent. I sat up straight, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. From which account? Joint savings. And one of them is linked to a business entity with Sierra's name on it. My stomach turned. Are they draining it? Not completely, Jenna said, but it's going down faster than it should. And there's this other account listed under Blake Creative LLC. It looks like Damien is involved too. His name popped up on 2 wire transfers. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Thanks for telling me, I said quietly. Just be careful. Something feels off. That night I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the savings account, the LLC, the way my dad had looked last summer flipping through bills at the table. I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were helping Sierra with a business loan. Maybe they knew what they were doing. But a part of me, the part that had learned to notice the small cracks before everything split open, was already spiraling. I called Sierra the next day. She picked up on the 3rd ring, sounding breathless. Hey sis, can we make this quick? I'm getting ready to record something. I didn't waste time. Are mom and dad investing in your business? She paused. They're supporting me. That's not a crime. Sierra, are they transferring money into something tied to Damien? There was another pause, longer this time. Then she let out a short laugh. Why are you suddenly interested? You've never cared about my career before. Because they're putting everything they have into this, and no one seems to be asking any real questions. She sighed, annoyed. God, Lauren, not everyone needs to live their life by your spreadsheets. You think you're protecting them, but really you're just jealous that someone finally believes in me. That stung more than I wanted to admit. Sierra, this isn't about me. This is about them risking everything for a business that hasn't proven anything. If Damien's involved, they deserve to know the full picture. Damien has experience. He's advised real companies. You wouldn't understand his world. I didn't push further. I knew that tone in her voice. She wasn't just brushing me off, she was warning me to stay in my lane. That weekend I drove down to Rochester. I didn't tell them I was coming. I pulled into the driveway and sat in my car for a few minutes before walking up to the porch. The house looked the same, but the lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters had started to chip. Mom answered the door surprised but smiling. Well, this is a rare visit. I asked if Dad was home. She nodded and led me into the living room where he sat in his recliner laptop, open glasses halfway down his nose. I told them everything. I mentioned the money, the LLC, Jenna's concerns. I didn't say she had leaked the info, just that someone had noticed. At first, they both looked puzzled. Then the shift came. Dad's jaw tightened, his fingers laced together. Mom crossed her arms and leaned back, face hardening. So what are you implying, Lauren? That your sister's running a scam? I'm saying you're not being careful. This is your retirement, your house, your future. Dad's voice was cold. You've always been suspicious of Sierra. Don't think I haven't noticed. Maybe it's time you admit this is about jealousy. I stood there stunned. No, it's about concern. You're making huge financial decisions without asking the right questions. Damien doesn't have a verifiable work history. There's nothing online about any of the companies he's supposedly helped. Mom's voice cut in sharper than I'd heard in years. Don't cross-examine us like one of your clients, Lauren. You don't get to waltz in here after ignoring this family and try to sabotage your sister's success. I felt my face flush. I'm not trying to sabotage anyone. I'm trying to keep you from losing everything. Dad stood up now. We believe in Sierra. She's building something meaningful. Not everyone needs to follow your formula for life. I took a breath, steadied my voice. Belief doesn't protect you from fraud. You're not investors. You're parents. She shouldn't be treating you like a bank. Dad pointed toward the door. Maybe you should go. Come back when you're ready to support your sister instead of tearing her down. I looked at my mom. She didn't meet my eyes. I walked out without another word. My hands were shaking as I opened the car door. I sat there for a long time before starting the engine, staring at the front porch I used to think meant safety. The drive back was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. I just kept replaying the conversation, the accusation in Dad's voice, the way Mom folded her arms like I was some outsider trespassing on their devotion. I wasn't angry, I was scared. Because for the first time I realized they wouldn't just ignore red flags. They would burn the whole house down if it meant keeping their faith in Sierra intact. And I was the only one trying to stop it. A few weeks after that argument, Jenna called again. Her voice was more serious this time, lower, almost hesitant. She told me my parents had closed out their retirement fund. Every last dollar. She couldn't access the specifics, but there were enough internal flags that she felt sick to her stomach. I didn't ask her to explain further. I already knew where it had gone. The same weekend I drove by the house on Autumn Ridge Lane. It looked untouched from the outside. The flower beds were freshly mulched. Dad's pickup was parked in the same spot it had been for 20 years. But inside, everything had shifted. Later I found out through a cousin that Mom and Dad had taken out a second mortgage. Over $300,000 funneled directly into a company called Soulless Glow Inc. The name sounded like a bad tanning product, but it was Sierra's new business, co-founded with Damien. Some kind of lifestyle brand focusing on sustainable skincare. Or something like that. Their website looked professional enough, stock photos of glass jars and smiling women with glowing skin. But the contact section linked to a Gmail account, and the company address was a shared co-working space in downtown Los Angeles. No one told me about any of it. There were no calls, no family group texts, no attempt to explain or include me. I found out through third parties, scraps of information passed through people who assumed I already knew. When I finally confronted Mom, her response was swift and icy. "You've made it clear you don't support your sister," she said. "Why would we involve you in something you've already condemned?" "I didn't condemn it," I replied. "I just asked questions. Sometimes belief matters more than proof, Lauren. And your sister needs this more than you do. You're stable. You'll be fine." There it was again. That word. Fine. Like I was furniture. Functional but unremarkable. The call ended with no resolution. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, unsure if I felt angrier at them or myself for still expecting something different. I made my decision that night. I packed my things into boxes, gave notice on my shared apartment in St. Paul, and moved to Minneapolis. A friend from college had an extra room in her condo, and I needed space. Distance. Air. It wasn't just about geography. It was about choosing not to orbit around people who only remembered I existed when they needed someone to applaud from the sidelines. I reached out to Miss Reagan, my former supervisor from a student job I had during college. She had always liked my work ethic and used to joke that I was the only 21-year-old she trusted with a calculator. She responded within an hour of my email. "I've got a client in need of bookkeeping help. Small business. Flexible hours. You want it?" "Yes. Absolutely." And just like that, I started to build something of my own. The first few weeks in Minneapolis were quiet. I focused on my contract work, mapping out my expenses with the kind of precision only someone raised to be responsible could understand. I set up my own LLC. I read up on independent tax filing. I kept my head down. But then the letters started arriving. Not from my parents. From Grandma Dolores. She had always been consistent in her love in the way she saw me without asking for explanations. The first envelope was small, cream-colored, with my name written in her familiar cursive. Inside was a short note and a photograph. It was of me and Sierra standing in her backyard next to a pumpkin we had carved when we were 8 and 6. I was holding the carving knife. Sierra was sticking her tongue out, pretending to gag at the smell. Behind us, Grandma's clothesline swayed gently in the breeze. I hadn't seen that picture in years. The note was simple. "Thought you might need a reminder that you were never invisible to me." I sat with that photo in my hands for a long time. Longer than I should have. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something else. The ache of being remembered by someone who still saw the whole of me. Over the next few months, she sent more letters. Short notes, a pressed flower, a newspaper clipping about women-owned businesses in Minnesota. She never mentioned my parents. Never asked why I had gone quiet. She didn't need to. Her silence on that front was her answer. Meanwhile, Sierra's company was gaining traction on social media. Her face was everywhere: YouTube, Instagram, podcast interviews. She talked about ethical business and building a brand that empowers women. I watched one clip where she said success is about community and vision. If you can get people to believe in something, you can build anything. And all I could think was how many people she had convinced. Starting with our parents. At night, I lay in my new bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, wondering if they ever missed me. If they ever thought about the daughter who never asked for more than fairness and was told that was too much. But I didn't reach out. I was learning to be okay with the quiet. With the steady rhythm of a life I was building on my own terms. I no longer needed their permission to feel proud of it. Still, a part of me waited. Watched. Not for validation, but for the other shoe to drop. Because I knew Damien. And I knew people like him didn't just fade into the background. They left behind debris. Financial, emotional, sometimes both. And deep down, I feared my family had just handed him the matchbook and a can of gasoline. It was the second Friday of February when Jenna called again. I was sorting receipts for a bakery client, sipping lukewarm coffee in my small Minneapolis office when her name lit up my phone. I almost didn't answer. I was tired. But something in my gut told me to pick up. "You were right," she said, without a greeting. My stomach dropped. "About what, Sierra?" "Damien. They're gone." I stood up slowly, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "What do you mean gone?" "The company's website is down, social pages wiped. Every linked business account attached to Solace Glow has been emptied. No trace." Their landlord in LA said they disappeared overnight. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Nothing. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Lauren, she added, there's more. The bank's been trying to contact your dad. The second mortgage isn't being paid. They're behind on every single payment. If it doesn't get resolved by March, the house is going into foreclosure proceedings. The silence between us felt like it could swallow the city whole. Then she whispered, I think your mom ended up in the hospital. Something with her heart, no details yet. I'm sorry. I thanked her. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew better. After I hung up, I sat back down staring blankly at the spreadsheet open on my screen. All the numbers blurred. All the noise in my head settled into one deafening truth. They lost everything. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I just felt cold. A strange, quiet kind of cold. Like standing in an empty room after all the furniture has been taken. Like realizing you've known this ending for a long time but hoped maybe you were wrong. My phone buzzed again 5 minutes later. It was Mom. I didn't answer. Then Dad. Then Mom again. The next call came from a restricted number. I turned my phone off completely. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the window panes. I tried to remember the last time Sierra had spoken to me like a sister. I couldn't. I tried to picture Damien's face, and all I could summon was that smug, curated smile he wore the night she introduced him through FaceTime. The local news picked up a story 2 days later. Jenna had been right. The entire online footprint of Soulless Glow had vanished. The domain was deactivated. Trademark filings were left incomplete. No known investors had been paid back. No products had ever shipped beyond sample batches for influencers. It had been a shell. A convincing, beautiful shell. I walked to the nearest corner store to get milk and saw my parents' house in a real estate alert email that popped into my inbox later that night, listed as pending foreclosure. No photos. Just a single sentence. Bank-owned property. Buyer responsible for back taxes and repairs. I stared at it for a long time. The next morning, Grandma Dolores called. She didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was. They're calling everyone, she said. Looking for Sierra. For him. Asking questions they should have asked months ago. I didn't say anything. They won't find her, she added. Not unless she wants to be found. I sat down on the floor, the phone cradled between my shoulder and ear. Do you think she planned this? Dolores paused. Her breath crackled softly through the line. I think she knew what she was doing. And I think your parents let her do it because they couldn't bear to believe she was capable of it. They still don't believe it, I whispered. I know. She didn't try to comfort me. I didn't want her to. When we hung up, I turned my phone back on. 43 missed calls. 11 voicemails. 8 text messages from Mom, 2 from Dad. One just said please. I didn't respond. Over the next week, they kept trying. They asked me to call. To meet. To talk. Dad left a voicemail saying he didn't know what had gone wrong. Mom texted that everything was a mess, but family needed to stick together. Family. The word no longer meant what it used to. Not to me. I went to work. Cooked dinner. Read emails. Paid bills. Went on walks. I lived. Somewhere in another city, Sierra was probably doing the same. Maybe under a new name. Maybe with a new idea. Maybe without a single ounce of regret. She hadn't called once. Neither had Damien. And I didn't expect them to. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with a photo of my family from 10 years ago. All of us smiling at some lake resort, arms around each other, matching t-shirts that said Blake Family Weekend. I looked at my younger self in that photo, eyes full of hope, shoulders pressed tightly to a sister who used to sleep beside me in the same bunk bed. I wondered if that girl would have ever believed how easily she'd be forgotten. I slid the photo into the drawer, turned off the light, and went to bed. 3 weeks passed in a haze of silence. My parents stopped calling every day, but not because they gave up. I think they were regrouping, trying to decide on a new strategy. I blocked their numbers after the 10th voicemail, each one a variation of panic, desperation, and then guilt, but I knew it wasn't over. It was a rainy Thursday when they came to my apartment. I was folding laundry, the sound of the dryer humming softly in the background, when someone knocked on my door. Not the polite kind of knock. This was firm. Intentional. I froze. When I opened the door, Margaret was standing there, soaked from the rain, a manila folder clutched tightly to her chest. Her face was gaunt, eyes ringed with exhaustion. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. Thomas stood a few steps behind her, hands in the pockets of his coat, eyes on the floor. "Hi, Lauren," she said, voice shaking. I didn't answer. I just stepped back slightly without inviting them in. She took it as permission and stepped inside anyway. Dad followed, silent. I stayed by the door. They stood in my small living room, both dripping onto the hardwood floors. The folder in her arms was swollen with paperwork. I could see the corner of a foreclosure notice peeking out. "We didn't know where else to go," Margaret said. I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" Her lip trembled. Thomas shifted his weight. "It's all gone," she whispered. "The house. The savings. Everything. We're trying to stop the foreclosure, but the bank won't listen. They say it's too late." She opened the folder and pulled out a page, hands trembling slightly. It was a printout of a loan application. "We need a cosigner. Someone with good credit. You've always been responsible, Lauren. You thought maybe I'd fix it for you." I interrupted, keeping my voice low. "Like always." Thomas finally looked up. "We're not asking you to fix everything, just help us get back on our feet. This doesn't have to be forever." I stared at them both. "You mortgaged your entire future for Sierra and Damien. You never once asked my opinion, never told me anything. And now you want me to put my name on another mistake." Mom's eyes welled with tears. "You're our daughter. You're the only one left. That's not the same as being loved." She stepped closer, hand outstretched. "We know we were wrong, but we didn't think it would end like this. We thought she had something special. We wanted to believe." "So did I said. "And when I didn't, you accused me of jealousy." Thomas spoke for the first time. "We were scared. She was all we had, or thought we had." "You had me," I said, voice sharper than I intended. "You just didn't want what I offered." The silence between us filled the room like smoke. They looked at me like strangers, lost and unsure of how to come back. "We can't afford to rent anywhere," Margaret said softly. "The debt is mounting. The credit score is ruined. We need help. We need you." "No," I said simply. "I'm not doing this." She gasped, and Thomas flinched like I'd slapped them both. "We're your parents. That didn't stop you from choosing her over me." Again and again. I walked to the door and opened it. "I think you should leave." They didn't move at first. Then Thomas nodded slowly and tugged gently at Margaret's sleeve. She followed, but not before turning to me one last time, her voice cracking. "We're still your family." I didn't respond. I just looked at her until she stepped outside. I shut the door behind them, locked it, and stood there for a long time, forehead resting against the wood. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from how much I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe they had come because they loved me, not because they were drowning. I called Nathan the next morning. He had been a classmate from undergrad, now a civil attorney who handled contracts and family legal issues. We hadn't spoken in months, but he picked up immediately. "Hey stranger, what's up?" I explained the situation. The visit. The pressure to co-sign. He didn't hesitate. "Do not sign anything. And if they try to use your name or apply in your name without consent, you call me immediately." I've seen this before. Desperate people make messy decisions. "Thanks," I said quietly. "You doing okay?" I didn't answer. He didn't push. A week later, a letter arrived from the bank addressed to me. They had tried to list me as an emergency guarantor. Nathan fired off a cease and desist notice the same day. The next voicemail from Mom came that night. "You've turned your back on us, Lauren. After everything we've done for you. We're your family. You'll regret this." I deleted it without listening to the end. Some bridges don't burn. They collapse because no one ever cared enough to maintain them. I drove to Grandma Dolores's house 2 days after my parents showed up at my apartment. I didn't tell her I was coming. I just packed an overnight bag, turned off my phone, and headed south toward Rochester. It was late afternoon when I pulled into her driveway. The porch light was already on, casting a warm glow against the falling dusk. She opened the door before I could even knock. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, voice steady. The inside of her house hadn't changed since I was a child. The same floral couch, the same wooden clock that chimed every half hour. She led me to the kitchen without a word and poured me a cup of tea. Then she disappeared down the hallway and came back carrying a small wooden box. It looked old. The edges were worn, the metal clasp rusted with age. She placed it on the table and sat across from me. "Open it." I hesitated, then flipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside were several manila envelopes yellowed with time. I pulled one out and began leafing through its contents. Legal documents, deeds, titles. My name wasn't on anything, but I recognized the address of Grandma's old farm property, the one she had sold years ago after Grandpa died. "What is this?" She folded her hands. "That land was supposed to stay in the family. It was mine outright after your grandfather passed. But about 20 years ago your father came to me, said he needed it for collateral to start a business. He promised to handle it properly. Said he'd never let anything happen to it." I felt a weight settle in my chest. He told me he just needed my signature for paperwork. I trusted him. I didn't read everything. Turns out he used it to leverage a large loan. And when the business failed, the bank took the land. I looked down at the documents again. Her signature was right there, inked next to a notary seal. I could imagine the moment. Her sitting at her own kitchen table, probably with a cup of tea in the same mug I was holding, signing away something she didn't realize she was losing. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She let out a slow breath. "Because I didn't want you to stop believing that your father was a good man. I thought maybe he'd grow into someone who deserved that faith." She reached into the box and pulled out another envelope, this one thinner. Inside was a folded photo of me at age 10 sitting on the back porch reading a book, the family dog curled up at my feet. "You were always the quiet one. The one who watched, listened. I saw it even if no one else did." I didn't know what to say. The tea in my hands had gone cold. "When your parents came to me last week," she continued, "they asked if I could help cover the loan. I said no. Not out of spite, out of clarity. They've chosen who they are. And they've chosen who matters to them." I looked up. "And Sierra." She stared at me a long time. "She reminds me of your father in all the worst ways. Charming, convincing, but always chasing something shiny. Never looking back to see who's left behind." I felt my throat tighten. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" "I hoped it wouldn't," she said quietly. "But I knew it could. That's why I kept everything. In case someday someone needed to understand the full picture." I ran my fingers over the edges of the documents, thinking about how much I had tried to deny the truth. How many times I had softened their words in my memory, made excuses for their favoritism, their silence, their absence. "I wanted to believe I was wrong about them," I whispered. Dolores reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Wanting to believe in people isn't weakness, but clinging to lies, that's where the damage lives." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the clock ticking behind us like a soft warning. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I don't have much left to pass on, Lauren. No houses, no savings. But I want you to remember this. You are not broken. You were never broken. You don't owe anyone your stability just because they burned theirs to the ground." Tears pressed at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I don't know what to do next. She stood and opened the cabinet behind her, pulling down a small ceramic tin. She opened the lid and handed me another photo. This one was newer. Just me sitting with her in the backyard last fall. Leaves all around. Our hands wrapped around mugs of cider. "Just don't lose yourself," she said. "That's all I want." Later that night, I lay in the guest bedroom, under the same quilt I used to curl up in as a kid. The window was cracked slightly, letting in the scent of pine and distant rain. I listened to the sounds of the old house creaking gently and felt for the first time in weeks something close to peace. Not closure. Not yet. But something steady, something real. It started with a short segment on a local morning news show. Someone had forwarded me the clip in an email with no subject line. I watched it in my office with the volume low, hands clenched in my lap. A reporter stood in front of a glass building in downtown Los Angeles, wind blowing through her hair as she explained that Soulless Glow Inc. had vanished overnight, taking hundreds of thousands in personal investment money with it. She spoke of relatives, close family members, even retired parents who had mortgaged homes to fund a dream that never existed. The footage cut to screenshots of the now-defunct website, followed by images of Sierra and Damien smiling on red carpets and in curated Instagram stories. Then came the twist. According to public records, Damien Torres had been indicted for wire fraud in Nevada 5 years earlier under a different company name. The case had been dismissed without conviction due to lack of evidence, but the story had never gone away. And Sierra Blake, real name Shannon Rowe, had legally changed her name at 19 after dropping out of her first college in Oregon following a plagiarism scandal tied to a student-run business incubator. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. None of this surprised me. What did surprise me was how little I felt. Not shock, not betrayal, just confirmation. Like a puzzle piece finally falling into place. The fallout came fast. My inbox flooded. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Some wrote coldly accusing me of turning my back on my parents in their hour of need. They quoted Bible verses, spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of what it meant to be a good daughter. Others said nothing. Not even a message to check in. I figured shame had stolen their voices. I didn't respond to any of it. Nathan called the next morning. Just got off a call with someone I know at a firm that's representing one of your distant cousins. He's heard whispers that your parents might try to name you in some capacity, maybe claim you were involved in the business, or had knowledge of what Sierra and Damien were doing. They can't be serious, I said. They're desperate, Lauren. That makes people reckless. I want you to prepare for the possibility. If they push this into civil court, you need to be able to prove that you had no financial ties, no communication, no benefit. I already can. Good. But start documenting everything anyway. Emails, voicemails, texts, anything that shows they acted without your involvement. I'll get on it today. 1 hour later, an email arrived from my father. The subject line was hope. The message read, "Lauren, I know I made mistakes. I know I let you down. I thought I was doing the right thing by supporting your sister. I thought we were building something. I was wrong. But you're the only one left who might still believe in something better. We're lost. We don't know how to fix this. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I'm asking, please. You're our last hope." Dad, I didn't open it again. I didn't even move it to a folder. I left it there sitting unread and unanswered the way they had left me all those years. A week later, the story aired nationally. One of those news magazine programs that dives into financial crimes and betrayal within families. They featured interviews with investors who had lost retirement savings, blurred images of Sierra and Damien boarding a plane in New Mexico. They traced their travel to Mexico City. Then nothing. Gone. The anchor closed the segment by saying, in the end, it wasn't just strangers who were fooled. It was their own blood. I turned off the television and sat in silence. Grandma Dolores called me that evening. She didn't say much. Just told me she had seen the story that her neighbor had dropped off a pie in sympathy. "You don't owe anyone anything," she said quietly. "Let the truth stand on its own." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. More mail arrived over the next few days. Legal notifications from creditors tied to my parents' letters from banks, tax alerts. Some were addressed to me in error, others listed me as a possible associate. I forwarded them all to Nathan. He replied with brief, calm messages. "Already handling it. You're protected. Let me know if anything else comes through." I went to work, paid my bills, walked home through the snow. Sometimes I wondered where Sierra was. What name she was using now. What story she was telling the next person. But I never dwelled on it. It was my father's third email nearly a month after the story broke that finally pushed me to block him permanently. This time it came with an attachment. A photo of our family at the lake house when I was 15. All of us smiling. Me in the middle. Sierra with her arm around Dad. Mom holding a tray of sandwiches. The caption read, "We were happy once. Don't let that be lost." I stared at it until the screen blurred. We weren't happy. I was surviving. They were pretending. Sierra was already planning her escape. And I was already fading out of the frame. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. The snow had stopped. The world was quiet. For once, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an answer. The knock came on a Saturday morning. I had just brewed coffee and was flipping through client invoices when I heard it. 3 short raps, too precise to be a neighbor or a package drop. I peeked through the peephole and saw a young man with a press badge around his neck, camera slung over one shoulder, notepad in hand. I didn't open the door. "Miss Blake," he called out gently. "I'm with Channel 6 Investigates. I'd love a few minutes of your time. Just want to get your perspective, your voice in the story. I promise it'll be respectful." I backed away from the door, heart thudding. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade before I slid the deadbolt into place. When I looked out the window 10 minutes later, he was gone. But a plain envelope sat at my doorstep. Inside was his card and a scribbled note. "In case you change your mind, I didn't." By Sunday, photos of me had started popping up online. Old ones. A school yearbook shot. One from a family wedding 6 years ago where I had worn a pale green dress and stood 3 feet away from Sierra, smiling with closed lips. The captions were predictable. "Sister of fugitive Sierra Blake spotted in Minneapolis. Blake family accountant silent amid scandal." Some even pulled quotes from my college's alumni page, twisting my major in accounting into a line about whether I'd helped cover tracks. Nathan called that night. "You good?" "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." "They're fishing," he warned. "Looking for any link, any angle. Don't give them one. If anyone else shows up, call me first. Do not speak to anyone without me on the line. I won't." The next day, an email arrived from a firm I didn't recognize. A formal inquiry from a compliance officer representing Westwell Capital, one of the early funders of a fintech startup Damien had allegedly worked with before Solus Glow. They asked if I had ever served as a guarantor or listed reference on any of his contracts. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to Nathan. He responded 5 minutes later. "Do not engage, I'll handle it. They're trying to see if you're vulnerable." I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the edge of my desk. That afternoon, I turned my phone off again. I couldn't bear to see the calls. Several from relatives I hadn't spoken to since childhood. Names I recognized from holiday dinners and baby showers. All of them reaching out now that shame had entered their homes like smoke through a cracked window. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to hear the rehearsed apologies or the subtle pleas for connection masked as concern. They hadn't called when I was drowning. They had waited until the ship was already submerged. Around dinner time, my phone buzzed with a single message from Miss Reagan. "You know those people who used to call you quiet, invisible, too serious? They're just now learning where the real light always was." I stared at her words for a long moment. Then I walked to my file cabinet and pulled out the folder I had tucked away months ago. Inside was the certificate of incorporation for my business. My name typed cleanly under the company title Blake Tax Advisory. Issued by the state of Minnesota. Official. Legitimate. Mine. I ran my thumb along the paper edge. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have hashtags or launch parties. But it was solid. It paid rent. It paid groceries. It helped small businesses understand their books. It gave me something I had never truly had in that family. Control. And maybe it didn't change what had already happened. Maybe it didn't erase Sierra's betrayal or my parents' negligence, but it gave me something I could hold, something they couldn't take or twist. Later that night, I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and sat at the window. The snow had started again, soft and silent. The world below moved slowly, people bundled against the wind, their faces blurred behind scarves and winter hats. I imagined what it might feel like to disappear into a life that wasn't constantly reacting to others. Not hiding. Just existing on my own terms. I closed my eyes and pictured the office I wanted to open downtown. A real space with a door and my name on the glass. Plants by the window. Coffee always brewing. Maybe one day even hiring someone. A receptionist. Another accountant. Someone who'd never have to wonder if they were only welcome when it was convenient. When I opened my eyes again, the streetlight had flickered on. My reflection in the glass stared back at me. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't look like someone living in someone else's shadow. I drove back to Rochester in early April, the sky streaked with clouds that couldn't decide whether to stay or move on. The streets were quiet, trees just beginning to bud, and everything looked smaller than I remembered. Even the house. There it was, my childhood home now stripped of life. The shutters were closed, the porch empty. A faded for sale sign stood in the yard, slightly tilted. The grass hadn't been mowed in weeks. It didn't look abandoned, just finished. Like it had been part of a story that no one was willing to keep telling. I didn't get out of the car right away. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, fingers gripping the steering wheel, and stared through the windshield at the windows where lights used to glow at dinner time. Where laughter once spilled out, followed by arguments, then silence. I didn't cry, I didn't feel angry, I just felt done. When I finally stepped out, the wind was light, brushing my coat as I walked to the sidewalk. I stood there for a long while, watching the house, like it might still hold answers I had missed, but there was nothing. No ghosts. No memories clawing to be felt, just a house, just walls. Dolores had died 2 weeks earlier. I had been the one to arrange the memorial. There weren't many people. A few old friends, some distant cousins who lived nearby, and Jenna. Grandma had kept things simple in her will. A modest plot beside Grandpa, no ceremony, no church service. Just a letter she left for me tucked into a pale blue envelope, my name in her curling script. I read it that night alone in my apartment. I spent too much of my life trying to keep others comfortable, Lauren. Trying to be the one who smiled and forgave and gave until there was nothing left. Don't be like me. I loved you because you were never afraid to stand still when everyone else ran. Don't let them make you doubt that. This family may not know how to hold you, but I always did. I hope you find peace that doesn't ask you to disappear for someone else. I kept that letter on my nightstand right next to the first photo she ever gave me. As I stood in front of the house now, I felt her voice somewhere behind me, quiet but steady. Not pushing. Just present. The neighbors across the street were different. I didn't recognize anyone. No one waved. I was just a passerby now, not a Blake daughter, not the girl who used to rollerblade down the driveway in summer or hang Christmas lights with her dad. I left after 10 minutes. Before heading back to Minneapolis, I stopped at a coffee shop downtown. Jenna was already there, waving from the back booth with 2 mugs of coffee between her hands. She smiled as I slid into the seat across from her. "You look good," she said, then immediately added, "I mean, you look like someone who's finally breathing her own air." I smiled. "It's been a strange few months." She nodded, sipping from her mug. "I figured you'd want to know. A detective came into the bank last week. Off the record, he mentioned something about Texas. Said there were strong signs Damien was hiding out there, and Sierra might be with him." I didn't flinch. Just stirred my coffee, letting the cream swirl like clouds. "That doesn't surprise you, does it?" "Not anymore. I guess I thought you'd want to hear it. Everyone's acting like she never existed. Your parents haven't said a word about her in weeks. They're staying with Uncle Raymond now. In the basement. He's trying to get them on state assistance. I think Margaret's too ashamed to go out. Thomas, he doesn't talk much." I looked out the window. A family crossed the street. A little girl held tightly to her mother's hand, skipping with mismatched shoes. "They made their choices," I said quietly. "You think she'll ever come back?" I shrugged. "If she does, it won't be because she misses us. It'll be because she's out of money or needs someone else to blame." Jenna didn't argue. She just leaned back and watched me. "I always admired how you held your ground, you know. Even when it was lonely." I looked at her, surprised. "You used to call me the quiet one." "Yeah. Because you were. But that doesn't mean you weren't right." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels earned, not awkward. Outside, the wind picked up. A few leaves danced across the sidewalk, leftovers from last fall refusing to let go. When we said goodbye, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. Back in my car, I didn't drive straight home. I stopped by the lake near the edge of town, the one where we used to have cookouts in the summer. The benches were empty, but the water still shimmered, still moved, still existed whether anyone was watching or not. And that I thought was something I could understand. The sky was overcast the morning we buried Grandma Dolores. A soft wind carried the scent of damp earth and early lilacs. The cemetery was small and quiet, tucked behind an old Lutheran church on the edge of town. No one wore bright colors. No one made speeches. The priest kept it short. There were no long prayers. No eulogies from distant cousins. Just a handful of folding chairs and the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and pulled a slip of paper from my coat pocket. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. I didn't talk about the last few months. I didn't mention Sierra. I didn't mention the scandal, the betrayal, or the wreckage Dolores had quietly carried for decades. I spoke about one spring long ago when she had taken me and Sierra apple picking just outside Winona. I was maybe 7, Sierra 5. We had gotten lost in the rows of trees, giggling sticky with juice. Grandma had found us crouched behind a bush building a fort from fallen branches. She hadn't scolded us. She had just sat down next to us and helped tie sticks together with a shoelace from her own boot. That was the kind of person she was. The kind who made you feel safe by simply sitting beside you. When I finished, I folded the paper back into my pocket and walked back to my seat. No one applauded. No one needed to. It wasn't that kind of moment. After the service, people wandered off in small clusters. Most of the faces were familiar in the way old photo albums are familiar. People I used to know. People who used to know me. I didn't linger. I just stood off to the side watching the groundskeeper begin to lower the casket into the earth. Thomas approached quietly, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes lined with exhaustion. He stood next to me for a long moment before speaking. "You still mad at us?" I turned to face him. His voice wasn't defensive, it wasn't even hopeful. Just worn. "No," I said. "I'm not mad." He nodded slowly as if that was enough. "But I'm not waiting anymore either," I added. He blinked. "I don't need anything from you. Not answers. Not apologies. Not approval. Whatever we were, that version of us is gone. I don't hate you, I just don't carry you with me anymore." He looked down, then gave a small nod barely noticeable. "I guess I deserve that." I didn't reply. I stepped past him and walked toward the parking lot without looking back. That night, back in my apartment in Minneapolis, I sat at my desk and reviewed the contract for a new office space in St. Paul. It wasn't flashy. Just a modest storefront near a bakery and a dry cleaner. But it had enough room for 2 desks, a small waiting area, and a place for the kind of future I had built quietly day by day without anyone's permission. I signed the lease and emailed the scanned copy to the agent. Then I closed my laptop and reached for the notebook I had been writing in for months. My journal. The one I never showed anyone. The one I only opened when I needed to remember that I wasn't invisible. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "I didn't disappear, I didn't collapse, I didn't need them to hand me a future. I built it myself, brick by brick, with hands they never thought to hold. And now, for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. Not someone's daughter. Not someone's sister. Just me. And that's more than enough." I closed the notebook and sat still for a while. The air was cool, the apartment quiet, the kind of quiet I used to run from. But now it felt like peace. If you've ever been the one left behind, the one overlooked or doubted or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, tell your story. Write it down, speak it out loud. Not for them. For you. Because even if the apology never comes, even if they never change, at least you'll know you didn't stay silent. And sometimes that's how freedom begins.